Hi, welcome to Tech Ranch, a place where we learn and earn technical skills in the most efficient way. Let's make coding fun. Servlet API tutorial. Chapter 7, Servlet interview tips and preparation. What do we learn here? We are going to discuss and learn all about the Servlet technical interview questions and some tips how to practice our interview questions. So first, we need to know our skill level. To understand it better, first you need to make sure you are in a beginner skill level, intermediate skill level, or expert. For beginners, there will be no experience expectations. Just you need to know all the concepts and fundamental clearly. For intermediate, their expectations will be 1 to 5 years of experience and concepts and fundamentals, the theory. For expert, it will be more than 5 years of experience and concepts and fundamental, the theory knowledge. So once you make sure that you are in what type of skill level, being asked like rate yourself for Servlet, you can decide what type of set of questions for which skill level, how much your Servlet confidence will give you the set of questions in an interview for an interviewer. So let's see about Servlet technical interview questions for beginner. There will be simple direct questions and indirect questions. So one of them is like, what is life cycle of Servlet? We know it's like loaded, initialization of instance, and destroy and unload it. Then we have why do we need Servlet, the different advantages of Servlet, like platform independent classes and are compiled to platform neutral bytecode that can be dynamically loaded and run in Java enabled web server. What are the types and the methods of session tracking? We have learned about how we can maintain the session while HTTP is a stateless protocol. One is like maintaining sessions from hidden fields, cookies, URL rewriting, SSL maintain. And what do you mean by HTTP stateless protocol? This is HTTP stateless protocol means the server doesn't know who is the client every time whenever they raise the request or create an object of the request, because once the session is done, the instance of that particular request and response will be deleted from the server. So that's what do you mean? That's what the meaning of stateless protocol. Next is what are filters and advantages of filter. So filter, we know that it's a piece of code which can be reusable, that will be transforming content of HTTP request, response, and the header information. The advantages of filter: security check, modifying request and response object, data compression, logging, auditing, cryptography. What is deployment descriptor? We know it's a web.xml that contains all details of application and linking the flow of process of the application. Next, difference between servlet and applet. And there is another kind of web programming is called applet. So we can mention servlet is like a server-side programming, that configuration and keeps it on the server, whereas applet is a client-side programming and run on the browser and stay in the client. These questions being asked directly or indirectly. Servlet technical interview questions for intermediate, a little tricky and complicated. It says difference between servlet config and servlet context. So we have learned in the servlet context and config, where servlet config is used only by single servlet to get config information from web.xml. On the other side, servlet context used by multiple objects to get config information from XML file. There are some more, like object is one per servlet class in case of config, and with respect to the context, it will be globally defined and it exists even before giving the first request. Whereas in config, destroyed once the servlet execution is done. So these are the basic difference from config and context in Servlet API. Difference between send, redirect and forward. We have worked and learned about send, redirect and forward. Send, redirect is when we direct the information from one page to another or one servlet to another file or page or new location. When we create a new request, the servlet container create a new request and pass the information to the server. Whereas in the forward, it will simply carry the request and will forward it to the next location. Difference between web server and application server. Web server is most of the time work on HTTP protocol, whereas in application server it supports all kinds of protocol like FTP, SMTP, HTTP and many more. What is servlet lazy loading? Servlet container which doesn't initialize at startup is called servlet lazy loading. Servlet chaining is another kind of method where out of one servlet is given to the second servlet. It can happen for any number of servlets. So basically where one servlet is communicating to another servlet. So that's what servlet chaining called, creating a chain of servlet. What is the difference between the get and the post method? We have learned and created the servlet and see the difference. Like get is for the less secure and can only send limited data. Hence, it is not useful for sensitive information. Whereas when come to the post, that include length of the data required to send to the server. So it can be unlimited data basically. Load on startup element in web.xml. This is basically when we dynamically load the servlet. So this particular element in web.xml, the deployment descriptor, inside the servlet tag we define, that tells the web container about loading of a particular servlet. So this is some sample questions for the intermediate. Let's take a look of a sample questions for expert, where we have a little bit more experience than that. Why we need to implement single thread model in case of servlet? We can implement servlet in two different ways, either by single thread or by multi-threaded. Depending upon if we have implemented single thread, means only one instance is going to handle one request at a time. So no two thread will concurrently execute service method for the servlet. So this is the reason we implement single thread model in case of servlet. What is servlet collaboration? It's nothing but the communication between the two servlets, one servlet to another servlet, or many more. And that can be possible with the help of send, redirect and request dispatcher methods include forward class to communicate. So these are the way we can communicate from servlet and making a servlet collaboration. How can we refresh servlet on client and server side automatically? That is another questions when we actually work in servlets. On client side, we can use meta HTTP refresh. Server side, we can use server push. And this way we can refresh automatically. Can we call destroy method inside the init method? It is yes. What will happen? That's true. We can call destroy inside the init method, and if we do that, it will call the method in it will if it is not a overridden method. Why super init config is the first statement inside init config method? This will be first statement if we are overriding init config, by which it is storing the config object for future reference. We can use get servlet config to get info about config object that will be lost. Without that will give you null pointer exception. What is the difference between HTTP servlet and generic servlet in Servlet API? We have learned about HTTP servlet is like built-in servlet provided by Java for handling HTTP requests, whereas in case of generic servlet, that provides a framework to create servlet for any type of protocol. That can be FTP, SMTP or HTTP. Now let's take a look at the practice questions. These are the non-technical questions. All you need to just practice and prepare yourself that if interviewer asking these questions, how will you answer? Tell me about yourself. keep your resume with you and in detail and mention it accordingly. Rate yourself. Make sure what you are actually have the experience and the knowledge. Based on that, rate it so that they can have the questions and you can able to answer. That will give you confidence too. What's your expectations with respect to your work and your expectations? Make sure you already have it in your mind. Why do you want to join us, and what do you know about us? So these are the questions they mainly ask after the technical interview questions. What's your strengths and weaknesses? What are your goals? What are your future goals? Do you want to go in a leader, technical side, or management side? So these are the questions they will be asking you during the interview. Today's practice project is Picasso.com online art exhibition, which has 4 parameters: user ID, password, category, and artwork. The instructions: make a servlet named Picasso.com where user ID and password is for participating in the art exhibition, and submitted the images stored in database with different categories like motivationals, nature, people, animal, etc. For more resources and assistance, you can contact us techranch2019@gmail.com. This will help you to learn how we can make a servlet and connect to the another page. Login ID and password, you can contact the database using JDBC and refer to the JDBC tutorial, and keep the data, user ID, password, and images with binary large object in a database, and contact and getting it and submitting the images, and blocking using the filter. If the image is not in an appropriate category, you can block it using the filter. So this will help to learn almost everything about Servlet and JDBC. So far in the Servlet, we have learned what is Servlet, Servlet API and its life cycle, how we implement session, maintaining the session, Servlet email application. Advanced Servlet covers Servlet config and context API. Advanced Servlet 2, we cover filter, send, redirect, request dispatcher, and include and forward method. And finally, we concluded with Servlet interview tips and preparation. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please subscribe to our channel and stay tuned and updated with our upcoming video tutorials. Let's make coding fun.